What's going on, friends? It's Patrick Clark, joined by Brian Friend. Oh, so yesterday we recapped the top 10 men from the ranch era. We're here to recap the top 10 women from the ranch era as well. Brian, before we start off, I think you have something to say?
Absolutely, yeah. If you guys are following along, we appreciate all the support, the comments, the suggestions, challenging us on our picks. It's all great. If you like the stuff that we're doing, check out the links below. Head over to the website. Check us out on Instagram. Like and follow, subscribe, whatever you can. And if you like what we're doing and want to see us continue to put out content like this, the best support you can offer is on Patreon. It's fairly low barrier to entry. We got some different opportunities coming up in that regard. Thank you to those who are already doing so, and we appreciate anyone who considers it going forward as well.
Yeah, we got a lot of, like Brian said, we have a lot of cool stuff in store from the games and beyond. So please consider going to our Patreon, support the channel, and support us. So, all right, we're just going to go right into it. So, CrossFit Games Ranch Era Women, top 10 women.
Just in case anyone's what didn't see, we had already put out the top 10 for the men from this era. We will have coming up some top 30 lists for the Carson era, but this is specific to the years of 2007 to 2009. I took a look at all the women who competed during those 3 years at Dave Castro's family's ranch, looked at their performances during that time period, and it selected the best 10. Well, actually, the best 11 women in this case. I got a little greedy.
Yes,
so we're going to start at 10 and 11 and move our way up to 1.
Yes, we are. Let's start off with number 10 and 11.
So I was filled. Obviously, I was working from the top down in creating the list, and I got to the bottom, and I was like, you know what? Through all the men and all the women, I had every podium finisher from every year during this 3-year time period on the list. And I did not have the second or third place finisher from 2007, the inaugural CrossFit Games, left there. So I decided that I didn't feel great about that. So I did a little cheating here, and I'm giving the 10/11 spot to Mary Rigney, who was second that year, and to Nicole DeHart, who was third that year. Just a bit about them. You know, Mary had a fairly impressive and consistent performance with finishes of second on the hopper, sixth on the trail run, fourth on the total to get that second place spot. Nicole DeHart had a little bit more up and down. She was the winner of the CrossFit Total, 530 pounds back in the day, third on the hopper, and then 13th on the trail run. So obviously a strong athlete, didn't do as well in the endurance stuff, and the consistency of Rigney edged her out. So Mary Rigney, Nicole DeHart, podium finishers from the 2007 games, and rounding out our top 10 here.
Yeah, /11. And how about that old school picture right there? What do you think he's giving her? Like a gift card to Panda Express, or
$50? Yeah,
$50
back pocket.
Well, he probably, or he took that from Greg. It's like, hey, Greg, can you spot me your 20? You know. But yeah, that's what, as you know, this has been one of the cool things for me, as obviously being a big photo junkie, is going back and finding these photos and researching and seeing some of these images and bringing them back to life. Because for some of these people, they haven't seen these before, especially a lot of our new fans, because I was able to source a lot of these from the old CrossFit Games website. So it's been kind of neat to kind of pull them back up. So
yeah, and if you haven't been over on the website yet, there's an article up there, and some of the pictures from Instagram are different than the ones you'll find on the website. And speaking of Panda Express, you'll see a tent pop up for athlete number 9 on the website's picture that we chose, and it's Libby DiBiase. She's actually wearing the same outfit there as well, and I think it was kind of cool for me to see this and realize that, like we talked about the guys, just the overall physique some of these women had, but even in this case, the outfit selection, that this looks like the leader's jersey.
It does. It does.
And she was wearing sports bra and booty shorts all the way back in the early days of the CrossFit Games. And it's, we obviously weren't there back then. So it's kind of cool to see just that even on the women's side, which there was a lot less participation in the early years than the men at these things, but there were some super fit, very healthy, strong women showing up, Libby DiBiase being amongst them. She's did not ever finish on the podium, 6th place in 2008, including winning the deadlift burpee that year. She came back in 2009, had a falling off to 47th, but her 6th place finish in 2008 was actually quite impressive. Many of the women, if not all of them, who were ahead of her that year are on this list, and she edged out Rebecca Voigt that year, who is 7th. Rebecca ends up missing this list, but we will certainly have plenty to say about her once we get to the Carson era. So Libby DiBiase, 9th here, and I think a good spot for her.
Yeah, I don't doubt that, especially when it talks about Rebecca Voigt. Even back then, that wasn't no big feat to do is beat Rebecca Voigt in a workout or overall. So moving on to number 8.
Number 8, Tamara Holmes. She competed twice at the games during this time period as well. 4th place in 2008, so a couple spots ahead of Libby. 16th in 2009, including an event win on the snatch, and obviously much better than Libby DiBiase's 47th that year. And really, there's a few women from the 2008 year that did better than her that did not back it up with good performances. There was a big jump up in the level of competition in 2009. She was still able to hang tight. She was a big, strong athlete back then. She had 2nd place in the squat race in 2008. She won the snatch in 2009. Just for kind of a reference, she won that event with a 145-pound snatch. Also 5th place on the deadlift, 11th on the sandbag sprint. So strong, powerful athlete, good performances. This is probably someone very few people are familiar with. So it's pretty cool to be able to go back and give her some credit for some great performances early on in the games.
Yeah, definitely is that. Moving on to number 7.
Number 7, Jillian Mountie. This is one of those women that I referenced who was better than Holmes in 2008. She got on the podium, finished 3rd, but 2009 came back and had a regression down to 59th. There were a lot, like I said, a lot of women who had a drop off that year just because the caliber went up. Excuse me. In 2008, though, she was quite good. She was 2nd place on Fran, 4th place on squat race. She had a 3rd top 10 finish, 9th place on the deadlift burpee, and her worst finish that year was only 16th on the hill run. So very, very good one year, 2008, securing her 3rd on the podium and giving her enough to get her 7th place on our overall list.
And I'm spotting some Panda Express signs back there.
That's right.
All right, moved on to number 6.
Okay, so 6, 5, and 4 here are all going to be athletes who only competed once at the games and competed in the year of 2009. The separation between these 3 women in that year was very small, with Kristen Kepler coming in at 4th place overall that year, including an event win on the triplet. But she finished just behind those other women that we'll get to. And Chris Kepler obviously goes on to have a lot of impressive performances, especially the next 2 years after that, and again, we'll talk about her in the future for sure. But even in that year, it was a very good introduction. And basically there was one event that kind of tripped her up that year, being the sandbag sprint. She took 34th there, and she couldn't recover from it despite basically doing well on everything else. She was 1st on the triplet, 2nd on the chipper, had some strong performances, but sandbag sprint crushed a lot of people's souls. It also cost Kristen Kepler on the leaderboard. So she comes in at 6th amongst the Ranch era women.
Yeah. And moving on to number 5.
5, Carrie Kepler. So she was 3rd place that year. She had an event win on the couplet. She was actually tied with Chris Kepler on points at 75. They both had one event win. It was just like the smallest margins. She would compete 2 more years at the games after this, but again, not during this era. So she has this lone standing 3rd place, 2009 with one event win. And basically it was a very good performance. We mentioned that 2009 was a strong field. Obviously we know the athlete Chris Kepler goes on to be, so to, edge her out on a tie break, get a spot on the podium, and ultimately earn a spot in the top 5 in our Ranch era women's list.
And I don't know what she did to her hand in this workout, but she definitely gets points for toughness. I mean, I noticed that after I found this picture, she was bleeding from her hand, and that's pretty impressive. It shows that back then the women just didn't really care.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of things that were raw about those competitions in general, but one thing that I think it kind of becomes evident through pictures, stories, the video footage that there is documented, and the combination of that, it basically suggests that there was no lack of grit and toughness amongst any of the competitors, even back in the early days. In fact, in some ways, they might have been more gritty and tougher because they just didn't have all the efficiency and lifestyle implements that these athletes have now. So they just found a way to get it done, and Carrie Kepler certainly did in 2009.
All right, moving on to number 4.
Number 4, Charity Vale. She takes 2nd in 2009. she wins the chipper, which was the final that year. And it was, that was an event that I think that individual event, the 2009 chipper, the finale, kind of redefined the expectations of the CrossFit Games. We mentioned in the men's list that as a result of that total competition, Jason Kalipa mentioned that this was like no joke. The CrossFit Games had taken the next step forward. I think that event in particular, being the chipper, really was an eye opener for people who are paying attention or trying to compete in this sport, of just the totality of things that athletes were going to be expected to do, the time domains, the demand of skill, the volume of weightlifting. And after what was at that point the longest games that we've had, they had a long event that wasn't just a run to cap things off. She wins that. It propels her to second place, obviously finishing ahead of a future games champ. So even though she's only got one appearance there, she had a great close to the weekend, a second place, a first place, gets her second overall, and fourth on our list.
And now we get into the podium, the top three. And coming in number 3 is someone that we both know, and most fans would know.
Absolutely. Katie Matter, if you know her now, Katie Henninger, very, involved with Rogue Fitness and the Rogue Invitational, and has been a massive contributor in the space alongside her husband. But before any of that, she was a competitor. And I do think that there's kind of a clear divide here, that these top 3 women definitely stand out. Obviously, she was a CrossFit Games champion in 2008. She won the clean and jerk event that year. She did compete in 2009. She got 62nd. Like we mentioned, a lot of women had a dropping off there, but in that year, she was extremely good. And it was that every second counts year. The squat grace finale was basically where she was able to make up a lot of the time against some of the closest competitors, but she also was second on deadlift burpee, 8th on Fran, 7th on trail run. And she didn't have, any, bad performances necessarily compared to some of the others, including a pretty dominating performance on a very demanding workout in the finale. So she ends up getting the win that year and bumps up to third overall on our list.
Yeah. She didn't have any bad finishes. You know what she didn't have? She didn't have on shoes.
Wouldn't fly these days, but back then, no problem.
Yeah. And I think that's what she's deadlifting is 275. So, that's even today, that still holds up that's pretty impressive. So, like I said, this was a really cool picture of her, because I know Katie as, when I see her at the Rogue Invitational and various other events at the games and stuff like that. So it's always cool to look back and see someone, and just admire, and just where they were at back then. And, it's just really cool and really impressive. Moving on to number 2.
Number 2 overall is the inaugural CrossFit Games champion, Jolie Gentry. Obviously, first place in 2007. She had an event win on the hopper. She did compete all 3 seasons at the games during the ranch era, and very few of these women did that. She goes from 1st to 5th to 7th, so she's getting a little bit worse relative to the field every year. But as we've mentioned, the field is getting progressively better. And while we saw big drop-offs from several of those athletes, especially from 2008 to 2009, Jolie stays pretty competitive and only drops down 2 spots in that year, despite having many more women in the field. She obviously won the hopper event. She was also second on both of the trail runs and the CrossFit total in 2007. In that year, 2007, she earned 290 of a possible 300 points, which still stands as the most points earned relative to points possible of any champion in the history of the CrossFit Games. So a little bit of a fun fact there. Obviously, the format was quite different. 2008, 3rd on Fran, 4th on Hill Rod, another top 5 finish. In 2009, 9th place on the snatch, 3rd on the triplet, and probably the most consistent athlete, or definitely the most consistent athlete on the female side across those 3 years at the games. And well earned, very fit forerunner for fit women in this sport. Jolie Gentry, number 2.
And now our final athlete, wrap up the era, someone that everyone's pretty familiar with as well.
Absolutely. Most people will who follow the games in recent times will know Tanya Wagner for her prowess on the broadcast side of things. I have had the pleasure and honor of working with her in that regard. But much like Katie Matter or Henninger, before that, she was a great competitor in this sport. She did not compete in 2007. She showed up in 2008 and took second place. And then she returned in 2009 and won the competition. I really like this picture of her. Obviously, it's a cool kind of trophy. with the hammer there. This was the year that they had the sledge, so it kind of made sense. And obviously just great to see her super happy with the accomplishment. The interesting thing is that, obviously 2-time podium finisher kind of stands out because no one else was able to accomplish that. But she won in the hardest year. And although she didn't win any events during that championship year, she started off with 11th on the hill run, and she was top 10 in everything else, including second place on the snatch, 135 pounds, 10 pounds lower than Holmes. In the year that she was second, she was only 10 seconds, and this is the every second counts here. She's only 10 seconds behind Katie Matter, who was winning it, and they were right around 19 minutes. So the margin is incredibly small. Her performances that year included a second, a third, a fourth, and the fifth. Incredibly a close, a consistent performance across all those events. And basically, in addition to having a second and first, she's definitely the most consistent athlete that we had over that time period, really showing very few holes in her game. And I think that when I put everything down on paper, a clear choice for the number one in our CrossFit Games Ranchera Top 10 women.
Oh, most definitely. And it's just very impressive to see, because like you said, a lot of these women are still in the sport. They're still just doing amazing things. And then you look at someone like Katie, who actually is the reason why there's a Legends division at the Rogue Invitational. It's an opportunity for a lot of fans to see, like, people like Tanya Wagner and Kristen Clever even compete in those events. So one of these days they keep on. I think Tanya has been really trying to get Katie back out on the floor, but I don't think that'll ever happen anytime soon. But it's just pretty neat. You did a great job with this ranch era top 10. What do we have next?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to keep pushing forward. In the next era will be the Carson era, 7 years instead of 3, many more athletes, and we're going to actually bring in a guest. So stay tuned to see who we're going to have kind of supplement my opinions and process for evaluating that 7 years of the CrossFit Games that follow this ranch era. For me, it's a great opportunity to hopefully just shed some light and give some credit to the athletes that competed back then, that were the forerunners of the sport, and kind of paved the way for many of the athletes that people got to know in Carson and have continued to get to know in Madison. There's a couple more years still at Madison, 2023 and 2024, but eventually like to do the same thing for that era of the CrossFit Games. And personally, it was also always fun to go back and look at the history, see in trying to delineate between some of these rankings. You kind of can have an opportunity to learn about the different scoring systems that they used then, some of the different programming variations that they had, whether it's the number of events, the type of events, how some of the events seem to matter a lot while others do not, and see that a lot of the same kind of patterns exist, where there were athletes that showed great consistency and athletes that had these highs and lows. And I think that more than likely that's something that will always continue to be the case. And it's cool just to see that it was in the beginning too.
It really has been. It's really cool to be a part of the process as you go through this as well. And like you said, we do have a guest coming, and I think it's gonna be really cool. We are bringing a friend on to Be Friendly. So a little pun on words. Man, I mean, you really lucked out when they named you, huh?
I guess so.
I know. But anyways, in terms of supporting us, like Brian said at the start, please feel free. We would love to, subscribe to our channel on YouTube, all our social media. That includes Instagram as well. But subscribe. Please leave a comment on who you think we missed out in the top 10, or if Brian got it wrong altogether, or if he's right, tell him a good job. But if you want to support us in other ways as we move on into bigger and better ventures, please consider becoming a Patreon as well. Like I said, we're not asking for much, but it helps out. Every little bit helps. So we appreciate you, everything you do, all our fans out there. So again, thanks for showing up. Thanks for having us, and be friendly, our friends.